Welcome to episode number 200 of the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales, whether it's from confidence, comfort, and just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help professionals like you improve at sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking differently about what you already know. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and with me is the founder of Catalyst Sale, Mike Simmons. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Jody, 200. Can you believe that?
No.
Actually, I know you can't believe it because when you asked me the other day, you said, hey, Mike, did you ever think that you would get to 200 episodes? I said, absolutely. And I think your response was, I didn't.
Now, listen, what Mike is saying is true in fact, but not in spirit. Because I went on to explain when I start a show, I never go into it thinking, oh, we're going to do 200 episodes or we're going to do 100, or I just start a show because I'm excited to start a show. That is what I meant. Not that Mike Simmons is not good enough to get to 200 episodes, but you know, Mike.
Now you just said I'm not good enough.
Well, you know, Mike, he's going to take something you say and twist it and run with it because he's still bitter about what happened on the miniature golf course.
I am, but it's also because I listen. This is one of those things. If you listen to people, then you can have these kind of conversations, which sometimes frustrate people and sometimes people appreciate. Right now, I think Jody's frustrated because he went back to miniature golf.
No, I'm not frustrated. I just think you are. You just bring it up. Maybe that's why I didn't think we'd make it to 200, because after what happened, I thought you'd end it. You just say no more show.
I will have my vengeance.
One day. Okay, let's look at this. This is worth celebrating, Mike. The average podcast lasts 7 episodes. 7, and you have made it to 200. That is worth celebrating.
I'm pretty excited.
As you should be. In order to celebrate this, I want to spend an episode not just patting Mike on the back, but to say, okay, we've done 200 episodes. Let's look at what changed. But first, Mike, I want to look at something different. Why did you start a podcast? So this is a 2-part question. Why did you start a podcast? And the second part that you'll just answer altogether. Why do you still do a podcast 200 episodes later? And is it different than why you started one in the first place?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as starting the podcast, I knew that I wanted to share content and kind of get information out in the marketplace. Content marketing, inbound concepts, these are all ideas that were important to Mike and I way back when we originally launched the business. And I'm a big fan of podcasts. I've learned so much from listening to podcasts like the HBR IdeaCast, listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast, listening to the A.C.T.S podcast. I mean, there's just so many of these different episodes. And of course, creating Disney magic, and the Jody Mayberry show, and Park Leaders every once in a while. I mean, there's all these great shows, some that you're a part of, some that friends of ours are a part of. It's an awesome way to share information. I still think it's a great way to share information. The thing I was trying to avoid or get away from was having to blog and write content. And what I'm actually finding is I need to start writing more, because another thing I've avoided is writing this book that I think we've talked about probably for about 200 episodes, about a book coming at some point in time. And it will come. It will be there. And really, the thing I probably should do at this point in time is just transcribe every one of these episodes, make them 200 separate chapters in the book. Maybe we'll throw out 1 or 2 of them, but get that content out there. But I was avoiding the writing component, and I wanted to get, and even as I'm kind of rambling through this, I wanted to become more succinct in the way that I communicated pieces of information by doing a podcast that helped me. I'm a little bit better now in the way that I communicate. I don't think the editor has to edit as much. I still have to worry about, things like ums and whatnot, but I'm definitely more succinct and really just kind of excited about the idea of being able to share information through multiple mediums.
It's kind of funny that you rambled to say you want to be succinct.
It is funny that I rambled and said, I think 3 or 4 times in there. We'll have to, I don't know if we'll actually be able to count because the editors are so good at getting some of those things out. But yeah, that definitely was not as succinct as it was in my mind when we first started talking about it.
Okay, so there's the why behind all of it. What has changed with the business, with your approach to content, with the whole catalyst sale thing? What has changed in 200 episodes?
I mean, a lot of things have changed. Well, Mike's not here anymore. He exited the business. So, we saw Mike kind of stop doing the podcast and fall off of that. We started going into a couple of different formats. There was a format before where we'd bring guests on and you would still be on reading the intro and reading the outro. Today, I'll do those episodes with the guest. I'll actually read the intro and read the outro. I do the intro and outro separate from the actual recording with the guest. So the editors have to stitch those pieces together, which makes it a little bit easier on me because I can record, mess things up, and then just re-record the intro and outro again. And I'm getting a little bit better with it, but there's some tongue twisters in that. So the format's changed a bit. There are some episodes where we're really good at keeping it to about 15 to 20 minutes, and there's some that go a little bit longer. The interviews go longer because I like to get into deeper conversations with the people who are on there. I've also started bringing some more people with a background in sales on the podcast, and intentionally avoided that originally just because I think there's so much noise in the market, and because I think it's interesting when you can connect the dots between work that we do in HR. So folks like Jennifer McClure and Lori Rudiman, things that you can do in operations, like a Dan Cockrell and a Lee Cockrell, things that you can do in personal vibrancy, like a Jeff Knoll, things from a park leader perspective, Jody, and you can pull all these roles together and realize, there's a lot of similarities between what we do in each of those roles and what professionals in sales do.
Yeah, it's good. That I do remember from the beginning, you were deliberate. You said early on, I don't want to have sales professionals on the show. I want to reach outside of sales. And so that has been one change. A change that Mike mentioned that I'm most proud of is Mike doing episodes on his own. That to me that's a big deal. I'm happy about that because as much as I love doing episodes with Mike, to me that shows, all right, Mike's come a long way. I've done well if he can go out and do them without me. That to me, that means I've done well.
As you have.
Yeah, I told Mike the other day that I subscribe to the Catalyst Sales Show now, but if I show up on one, I don't listen to it. But the ones Mike does, I listen to. Because I just hear so much of myself, Mike. I like the sound of my voice. I know a lot of people, I got over it and now I like it. But I still hear myself so much, I don't listen to my episodes.
Yeah, I still haven't gotten to that point. I mean, I can tolerate my voice now, and I just kind of accept that that is what it is. But I'm not to the point where I enjoy the sound of my voice. It's got to be kind of weird. So you enjoy the sound of your voice?
I don't listen to it for entertainment, but I don't hear myself talk. And I used to years ago and think, oh gosh, I hate that. Now I say, hey, that's pretty good.
It's one of the cool things about doing a podcast is once you hear yourself, you can start to say, oh, there's some verbal tics that I have, things that I say over and over again, words that I have trouble pronouncing, and things that I might either want to avoid or practice. So if you struggle with your own voice, start recording some content, listen to it, and it's amazing what you can learn. Okay,
we looked at what has changed, but what has stayed the same in 200 episodes?
I think the big thing that stayed the same is this kind of definition of sales. So when we first started, we talked about what is sales, and I think that was episode 3. It's, you still look at it the same way. It's 4 years, 5 years later, 4.5 years later, and it's about connecting the dots between a problem that exists and a solution that exists. Now, the thing that I've actually added to that definition now, and I've added some Rumsfeld into this, but your problems are either known, unknown, or unknown unknowns. So, and then on the solution side, you either have known knowns, known unknowns, or unknown unknowns. So when we think of sales as a definition, or when I think of sales as a definition, I think of it as connecting the dots between a problem that is known or unknown and a solution that is known or unknown. And we as sales professionals can help our customers make that transition from unknown problem to known problem by either asking questions or providing some experience. Could happen on the marketing side. But now once that problem becomes known, then now we're there to help them navigate the path to solve that problem with either an unknown solution, which then becomes known, or a known solution. So that's one thing that's stayed consistent. The other thing that stayed consistent is the sales process that we've adopted and have coached on, and traditional solution selling sales process where You validate whether or not you could see the potential for a relationship, qualify, understand the who, what, why, where, when, how from a customer's perspective. Fit, once we understand the problem, determine can we actually solve it? So does our solution actually solve the problem that exists out there? That's fit. Feasibility, based on our ability to solve, can the customer actually implement? Can they pay for it? It's feasibility. That's a test that they do on their side. It's the fit test from the perspective of the client. Then we get into things like proposal, close one, and then confirmation. All of that has stayed the same. I'm going to add one more change. I think early on, I focused so much on how the customer goes through their decision-making process and helping them navigate that, how we go through our sales process and helping the organization forecast. What I didn't give enough credit to, and Jeff Bajorek is someone who's been on the podcast, and we've talked about this, both he and I have talked about this a couple of times, but how you can create a repeatable process on the sales rep side. And when you get into things like our Demystify sales course and the revenue operations stuff, this is understanding how to approach things from a rep perspective, which is identify whom you're going to engage with. You actually engage with the customer, establish objectives, clarify next steps, and call them to action, and just begin that looping process again with engage. So a couple of things have changed. A couple of things have kind of stayed the same. I'm still as excited about the next 200 episodes as I was about the first 200 episodes. And we do a weekly podcast. We'd made it, I think, 150 or 160 some odd episodes before we missed our first week, and then went through a period where we missed a couple of weeks. It's tough to keep a consistent cadence. I mean, and you know this, you've gone 10,000 steps a day for what seems like an eternity. How many days are you up to?
A number of days, I'm not sure because I don't have my spreadsheet in front of me, but it's 4 years and 2 months. I think today actually makes exactly 4 years and 2 months.
So there's a level of commitment that is necessary in order to keep that chain moving along. And same thing with the podcast. So we batch record some of these things. We don't actually, this one we're going to say this is episode 200. But I mean, as much as there's been things that changed, there have been some things that have stayed the same. And as we go forward, there'll be some things that change. And I imagine there'll still be some things that remain the same.
What do you think will change in the next 200 episodes?
Well, based on the last 200, I think we will continue to iterate on the intro and outro of the podcast. One, to just keep you on your toes, and two, to help clarify the message that we get out to folks so that they know at the beginning, what am I really getting into? So I think that'll shift a little bit. I'd like to do more video content just to get some of that out there. And I'm doing more video content just in front of the camera as we record courses and work to get additional content out there. I'd like to get more video content out there. Might even look to do kind of group guest or panel type discussions. I've even considered the idea of recording in multiple sessions and then editing that content together so that although the recordings might take place in 3 or 4 different scenes or scenarios with different people, we stitch the content together in a way that makes sense. So I think we can be a little bit more creative in the way that we deliver content. So I expect those to be things that'll change over time. We went through a period where the beginning of the COVID stuff, when Jody and I were out in Florida and I flew home, went through a period where I recorded 10 episodes in a row, didn't do any editing and just pushed those live. That was an interesting process because I didn't have any editing. There was no music on the front end, did not clean the episodes up at all. And that was pretty cool to do a daily thing. Ran another one of those unedited episodes here recently. Kind of like that. We saw user numbers go up, but because of the frequency of the additional podcasts, I don't know that was indicative of adoption actually raising. So maybe start to look at some of the daily stuff. I'm not certain. I think one of the other interesting things that we did, just as I'm reflecting back, we did that 25 Days of Christmas series. And that was all a YouTube video series where I was working on just trying to get better in front of the camera and get more comfortable with some of the video editing. We stitched 5 of those episodes together in packs. They were called bonus packs. And so we had 5 bonus episodes of 5 covering the 25 days of sales. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And it was really cool was to see the website traffic start to change and shift with that. So who knows? I mean, it's going to be kind of cool to see what happens next and how things start to change.
One thing I have noticed, you do less over 200 episodes. When we first started, And Mike and I talked about this back then, so I don't think this will surprise Mike. You used to always use sales lingo that maybe not everybody would understand. I think you've gotten better now understanding you talk to an audience that isn't actively in sales and may not always know what your sales lingo means.
I think that's awesome. And, and now that you mention it, that's another thing that's changed. And, for those who've seen video, you've seen these shapes that I've got behind me on the whiteboard. And it's all part of this really working towards simplifying sales. And that was the mission of this podcast, is how can we simplify sales so that people can help execute in this environment better, and demystify sales, improve people's confidence. And when you start talking in sales jargon, like, oh, we're managing an opportunity, or we're building pipeline, or we're working on our forecasting, or we're doing all 80 SDRs, BDRs, account executives, customer success managers, CRM, like all this stuff, it just starts to sound noisy. Where the reality is, in each of our operating environments, we have folks that we're trying to help do something. We're compelling them to take some action. We're connecting the dots between a problem that they have and a solution that exists out there. And we don't need the jargon. And when the jargon comes in, all it does is serve the purpose of confusing things and adding to the noise. So that's an interesting point, Jody, and one that I really didn't think about, is that we've gotten better at not having as much jargon, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, it's a good thing. And I like what you said about moving forward, trying to experiment more, stitch things together. I do that with the Jody Mayberry show all the time. I'll do things like, well, let's just say I wanted to do an episode about sales. Well, of course, I'm going to call Mike Simmons, but I might also call 2 or 3 other people and say, hey, just 5 minutes. Tell me about sales in 5 minutes. And then I'll make an episode out of 4 or 5 pieces of that. I enjoy doing that sort of episode.
It's pretty cool when you can curate resources. And, that's how we go out and we find experts. Like, I'll read a book, and, Bo Burlingham was on here, and he wrote Small Giants and, Finish Big. Awesome author. And it was just great to have him on the podcast. And you introduced me to Steve Anderson, author of the Bezos Letters. We've had folks like Rand Fishkin, Lost and Founder, Dan Ponifract, Open to Think. We've had some really cool authors on here. And I've got a list of other authors that I would just love to get on the podcast at some point in time. So maybe that'll be another one of those things that changes. We'll just increase the number of authors that we bring on. We'll probably have Dan Cockrell on here pretty soon with his book. Was it Culture in Your Kingdom?
How's the culture in your kingdom?
How's the culture in your kingdom?
Which I hear the audio version of that book is just incredible.
Well, so how do I get access to the audio version of the book? Does the audio version of the book exist already? No,
not yet. Not yet.
Then how'd you hear it was awesome?
Because I narrated it. That's right. I narrated that book, and doing the final touches. I'm going to do an episode of my own podcast about what it takes to create an audiobook, because it's kind of a fascinating process. It's long and tedious and at moments terrible, but when you start, it's really exciting, and it's tremendous when you finish, but it's coming.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing I want to do with the book, is I want to get the book out so that I can narrate the audio version of the book. And so that's another thing that'll change. And, maybe what we do with it is we release components of the book in the podcast too, as kind of a teaser to get things going. So, there's just so much that you can do with a podcast. There's so many things you can test with a podcast. And once you get the content recorded, there's so many ways you can reuse it. And that is something that we will get better at Catalyst Sale, is reusing the content, repurposing the content. So Jen is working on different ways that we can do that currently.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about podcasts is you don't have to use it once. There's so many different ways it can be used. And that's something that still needs to be done here with the Catalyst Sale podcast.
So I would love to hear from listeners what they would like to see us do differently with the podcast. So if you have recommendations on guests that we should bring on, if you have recommendations on authors that we should bring on, books that we should read, we did a couple of book review episodes. We talked about The One Thing. We talked about a couple of, I think we talked about Leaders Eat Last. I'd love to hear back from you. What else would you like to see? What can we do differently? How can we continue to provide more value to you, to the folks who are listening to the podcast? And, let me know You can send an email to me at podcast@catalystsale.com. That'll come into our queue. You can go to the catalystsale.com website and hit the live chat. That'll come into our Slack instance. So podcast@catalystsale.com or the live chat at Catalyst Sale.
Mike, are you open to getting feedback right here on the podcast on something you can improve on for the next 200 episodes?
Absolutely.
All right. This is risky because Mike and I have not talked about this. It was something I was going to bring up, and now I'm doing it right on the show. When you do episodes without me, Mike, I think on your opening, you need to be Mike Simmons +5 and then go back to being Mike Simmons. The opening needs a little more spice.
So I need to amp it up. Like I'm not bringing the intensity to the read. So yeah, I would agree with you 100%. The other one that I can do better at, like building on it, is I critique myself, are the outros. I mean, the outro just sounds like it's stitched on there, and literally it is. I use the time to interview the person that I'm talking to, and then after the fact, I go in and I just record on my own, reading through OneNote those items. So I'm going to do one later today, and I will work to level up that one. And you can tell me if I have taken your guidance and started executing.
All right. Mike Simmons +5 on the intro, and then you can go back to being Mike Simmons. Yeah. Well, Mike, this has been a treat for me to be with you for 200 episodes. Although I haven't been on every episode. I've been on, well, almost as many as you.
Almost.
But I have been on almost every episode. It's been such a treat for me. We started this show so long ago, and 200 episodes. That is a milestone. There are not many shows that make it this far.
Well, thanks for being a partner as we've worked through this. I'm actually going to ask you to do something different. I am going to read the updated outro, and I will see if I can level 5 this outro on the way out.
Oh, man. Mike Simmons +5 on the outro.
Jody, thanks for an awesome podcast. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this discussion, please share it with them. Let us know via Twitter or LinkedIn. I'd like to hear how you're applying the lessons learned and concepts discussed in your role today. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?